I grew up in a Jewish home like most Jewish people do, and my grandparents were from Eastern Europe, and so we grew up in a pretty segregated type of community where we stayed away from Gentiles, and we kept to each other. And as I went through Hebrew school, it was something that I really enjoyed. I'll never forget going through my bar mitzvah, and it was a turning point in some ways because as I went through my bar mitzvah, all we did was memorize our parts for the bar mitzvah and never really understood what it was about. And there was just this emptiness that was there. No connection with God, no understanding of it. And because there was just a lack of significance for me in terms of my Judaism, I was trying to find something that would give me some meaning and significance in life. And I went off to Penn State where I majored in architecture. And I'll never forget, it was during my first year while I was there, I went to the high holiday services. The service was in Hebrew. There was no understanding of what was being said. And I'll never forget when I left and I said, never again. And the reason was, it was just this emptiness that was there. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was just this emptiness. And I walked away from it. So it just settled into complacency. Then it was during my sophomore year, there was a meeting in my dormitory, and it was called something like How to Be a Christian Without Being Religious. And somebody just simply shared the gospel. Someone shared their testimony. And my response was one of arrogance. And it was, everybody can get to God in his own way, and I think there was a little anger that was there. But over the next 5 months, I met off and on with several people, and we would go through Messianic prophecy, and it meant absolutely nothing to me. Since I knew nothing about Jesus, looking at Messianic prophecies, if you don't know anything about Jesus, you don't know who it's talking about. But I got to the point where I didn't have any difficulty with believing in the supernatural or that Jesus could have risen from the dead, but there was no understanding about what the implications of that were for my life. About 5 months later, I was invited to another meeting on campus, and it was like the blind man in Scripture. It was like all of a sudden, I understood that Jesus was my Messiah. It was in a nanosecond. It was as if a veil was removed. All of a sudden, it made sense to me. I understood that I love the Lord, and I know that He loves me. And I felt compelled that I needed to be the next person to stand up and to tell people that I had trusted Jesus as my Messiah. And so I did, and I said that, and the room was silent. I sat down, and then all of a sudden I had this thought, what have I just done? And my palms were sweating. And so here it was, I had embraced Jesus as my Messiah. And as I began to grow my faith after a couple of months, where I knew that it was now time to tell my family what I had done, this decision I had made. And so, went home that weekend from Penn State to Philadelphia, sat down to talk with my parents, and it was awful for them. Their son saying that he's now a Christian. My mother went out of the room crying, and my mother's not an emotional person. My father said to me, I'll never attend your wedding. I wasn't dating anybody, but he just wanted to let me know that he wouldn't be there. Fast forward years later, one of the pieces of advice I give that are facing opposition from their families and tell them that it may take years. And I can't promise it will happen, but I know that what I've seen is that you'll see the respect of your family come, even though they may not understand it. That was one of my desires, is that God would allow our lives to look normal to my family. And God did that. I'm complete now that I know my Messiah. I had become a completed Jew. And I just love that my closest friends are Gentile believers who have just embraced me. Is what God was talking about in the book of Ephesians. And that is where He took Jew and Gentile, two groups that were enemies with each other, and that through this mystery of coming to know the Messiah, that He's created this entity called the church of Jew and Gentile being together, which they could not be one apart from what Jesus has done. And so I think about me being a Jewish believer, and that God has called us to work together, and that what He has done by bringing us together is that it's a demonstration to the world of what only He can do.